The house on Ocean Avenue on the night of November 13th, 1974. At 108 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. The kind of horror that most people only read about in fiction became grim reality. It began as a crime, the systematic slaughter of 6 members of the DeFeo family while they slept. But what happened afterward, what made this house infamous, was something far darker than any criminal act. The sun had long dipped below the horizon when the police received the call. A teenage boy, Ronald DeFeo Jr., had picked up a payphone and reported that his family had been shot. What officers found upon entering the quiet suburban home was gruesome. Almost too horrific to be believed. 6 bodies, each one executed with chilling precision, but beyond the bloodstains and shattered bone. Investigators could not have known that a far stranger chapter in this house's history was just beginning. House with a history. 108 Ocean Avenue was not originally built to be a site of terror. Constructed in the 1920s, it was a classic Dutch colonial, steep roof lines, wide porches, and large windows overlooking the quiet streets of Amityville. To neighbors, the DeFeos were just another family, reserved, unassuming, and reclusive. Yet, even before the murders, there were whispers about the house. Stories told by locals spoke of strange sights and sounds, unexplained shadows in the windows, lights flickering for no reason, and the uneasy feeling that something was watching from the perimeter of the property. At the time, police considered these rumors the idle talk of bored neighbors. Nothing more. The DeFeo crime scene officer Richard H. Guido, one of the first detectives on the scene, later described the interior of the house as eerily quiet. No struggle, no sign of forced entry. The bodies had been shot at close range, one by one, in their beds. Parents, siblings, even the youngest. 6 people, all dead. The only survivor was Ronald Jr., who claimed he had no idea what happened. But the physical evidence was absolute. The weapon was a rifle found in the home. Witnesses struggled to understand how a single 23-year-old could have gunned down his entire family. Still, the case was wrapped up in dark, tragic reality until the next family moved in. Enter the Lutz family in the autumn of 1975. Less than a year after the murders, George and Kathy Lutz purchased the Amityville house for far below market value. Most people assumed the discount was because of the notoriety. Just another uncomfortable truth surrounding the property. Nothing more. George, a soft-spoken former Marine, and Kathy, a gentle mother of 3 from a previous marriage, told themselves they were getting a great deal. They believed in second chances, in rebirths. The house was spacious with plenty of room for the blended family. Their children, Daniel, 13, Christopher, 9, and Missy, 8, were thrilled. They called it their dream home, however. What began as excitement soon turned into pure, unfiltered dread. The first nights, the Lutzes moved in on a cold November evening. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold, picturesque in every way. To any outsider, it should have felt like the perfect new beginning. But midnight brought the first warning. Mrs. Lutz woke in a cold sweat. It began with the smell, a putrid, indescribable odor like rotten eggs mixed with sulfur, wafting through the bedrooms. She shivered under the blankets. Certain something was very wrong. She wasn't alone. Her husband, George, was staring at the ceiling. His face was pale. Frozen. Then came the sounds. A low thumping, rhythmic, deliberate, emanated from inside the walls. Not the groan of an old house settling. Something deeper, echoing through the beams and floorboards, like footsteps pacing back and forth just out of sight. The children were sleeping, but the adults weren't. George reached for the light. Switched. Nothing happened. The bulbs flickered, then died. Complete darkness. Voices in the dark. George tried the lights again. Only then did he realize the house was eerily silent, too. Silent. No hum of the heater. No whisper of wind. Against the windows. Just stillness. And then, a voice. Soft. Male. Close. Directly behind him. Get out. George froze, his heart thundering in his chest. He turned. Nothing. Just an empty hallway, stretching into darkness. The voice had sounded real, uncomfortably real, like someone whispering directly into his ear. Kathy sat up, eyes wide. Did you hear that? She whispered. George nodded slowly. The children were still asleep, oblivious, but the air in the room had turned cold, icy, like the breath of winter itself. That night, they didn't sleep. The next morning, rationalization. Morning light brought reason, or what the Lutzes desperately clung to as reason. Must be the house settling, George said, forcing a smile. Just imagination, Kathy echoed, though her voice quavered. They fixed the lights, checked the wiring, and searched for a source of the foul smell. No gas leaks, no drainage problems, nothing except the lingering odor that came and went unpredictably. Still, they told themselves that once they unpacked, once they made the house feel like their home, things would settle. But peace did not come. Not even close. A presence they could not ignore over the next few days. The incidents escalated. Objects moved inexplicably. A coffee mug in the kitchen one day, a chair in the living room the next. Cold spots appeared throughout the house. Pockets of frigid air that no natural explanation could account for. Footsteps echoed above them at night, pacing, pacing, pacing. Yet the floorboards were empty. Whispers began in the dead silence, unintelligible at first, like garbled voices just beyond understanding. But the worst came on the third night. A sound that no one could dismiss, not even rationalize. A booming slam like a gunshot echoed through the hall. Then, laughter, children's laughter, echoing, hollow, mocking. The Lutzes stared at each other, speechless. They knew then, this was not imagination. This was something living, watching, waiting. Something that would not let them leave. The escalation. By the second week of living at 108 Ocean Avenue, the Lutz family's new home had begun to feel less like a haven and more like a cage. The initial warnings, whispers, cold spots, and fleeting shadows had grown into an unrelenting presence, a force they could neither see nor confront, yet one that dominated every corner of the house. George, a man who had faced discipline, danger, and the unpredictable stress of life in the Marine Corps, found himself on the brink of panic. Each day, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to tighten, pressing down on him and his family like a physical weight. The walls themselves seemed to close in, each creak and groan of the aging structure amplified into a sinister warning. Unseen eyes. Kathy, too, was beginning to lose her sense of reality. She reported the sensation of being watched constantly, even in moments when the house was otherwise silent. Sometimes while unpacking, she would turn sharply and see nothing. Yet the instinctive knowledge of eyes on her would not disappear. The children, initially thrilled by the new home, became increasingly restless. Daniel, the eldest, would wake from nightmares and insist he saw figures standing in the corner of his room, observing him. Christopher and Missy complained of someone talking when no one was there, whispering incomprehensible words that left them trembling. George tried to rationalize the incidents. Perhaps the stress of moving, the history of the house, and the notoriety of the previous murders were affecting their perception. Perhaps fear itself had given life to shadows and sounds. But even his practical mind began to crack under the unrelenting pressure. The furniture incident. First event that shattered any hope of normalcy occurred one evening as George and Kathy were preparing dinner. They had set the table when suddenly, all the chairs in the dining room slid violently across the floor without contact. The children screamed, startled, and George lunged toward the nearest chair, only to find it had moved as if pulled by an invisible hand. The laughter followed. It was not the innocent laughter of children, but a deep, chilling cackle that seemed to echo through the walls. Kathy dropped the dinner plates in terror, shattering them into shards that reflected the dim light and distorted patterns across the room. For hours afterward, the family could hear soft thuds, footsteps pacing in rhythm through empty hallways, ceaseless, like a drumbeat orchestrated by an unseen presence. The bedroom terror, perhaps. The most disturbing incidents occurred in the bedrooms. Kathy reported waking in the early hours to see a figure standing over her bed. A dark, humanoid form, immovable, featureless in the shadows. She tried to scream but found her voice caught in her throat. George, alerted by her muffled cries, entered the room, only to find the figure gone. Missy, the youngest child, began to experience night terrors beyond any normal fear. She would awaken, screaming about a man with glowing eyes watching her. Daniel, increasingly fearful, refused to sleep alone, insisting that the house was alive and that it hated us. George attempted to maintain control, reasoning that they were simply adjusting to the history of the house. He reinforced the doors, checked the electrical wiring, and even installed additional locks. Nothing mattered. The house did as it pleased. The Red Room and the unseen forces. Several days after moving in, the family discovered what Kathy described as the most unsettling room, a small, claustrophobic space in the corner of the house. The walls were painted red, the carpet dark, and the air oppressive. Here, the supernatural presence seemed strongest. Objects moved on their own, and cold air would sweep across the room regardless of the heating system. George began documenting the incidents in a notebook, trying to maintain a factual account. His entries detailed the hours of pacing footsteps, whispers that followed the family from room to room, and objects, utensils, books, and even framed photographs moving inexplicably. One night, as George slept fitfully, he was jolted awake by the sensation of someone sitting on his chest. He gasped, struggling to breathe, and felt an icy presence pressing down. Kathy, hearing his struggles, rushed to the bedroom only to find him alone, with no sign of anyone or anything. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, punctuated by whispers and low, unidentifiable moans coming from within the walls themselves. The smell of decay by now. The house had begun to exude a pervasive stench. Initially subtle, it grew stronger each day. The smell of rotting flesh, foul and acrid, lingering in corners and hallways. Attempts to clean, air out the rooms, and even use air fresheners had no effect. The family grew physically ill. Headaches, nausea, and sleeplessness became constant companions. Yet, remarkably, the children appeared immune, or perhaps more attuned to the house's malignant will. They would speak to the unseen presence as if it were a family member, calling it the man in the corner or the whisperer. George began recording these interactions, fearful but compelled to understand the house's influence. Each day's log became darker, filled with accounts of objects moving violently, lights flickering on and off, and voices speaking directly to the family. A priest is called finally. Desperation drove the Lutzes to call in professional help. Father Picararo, a local priest, came to the house, armed with prayers and the rituals of exorcism. Yet even his presence did not quell the events entirely. During his blessing, cold gusts of wind swept through sealed windows. Doors slammed shut, and he reported hearing voices uttering threats in low, guttural tones. Father Picararo would later describe the house as an accumulation of pure evil, feeding off fear, and thriving on the vulnerability of those inside. The Lutzes began to realize that whatever haunted 108 Ocean Avenue was not just a memory of past horrors. It was an active force, intelligent, malevolent, and intent on tormenting every living being it encountered. A family in despair sleep became nearly impossible. By the second month, the family operated on a fragmented schedule of exhaustion and fear. Simple routines, making meals, bathing, even using the bathroom, became exercises in courage. The house seemed aware of their movements, responding with cold drafts, sudden noises, and whispers that mocked their every action. George wrote in his journal, "One night, I do not know if we will survive this house. I do not know if it wants us dead or if it only wants to watch. But it is here, it is real, and it will not let us go." Kathy echoed his sentiment. "This house is not ours. It is something else entirely. I see it in the corners of my eyes. I feel it pressing on my shoulders. It wants us to fear it, to beg it, to leave it alone, and yet we are trapped." The house, as they began to understand, was no ordinary structure. The walls held a memory of the DeFeo murders, the screams, the terror, the blood. And somehow the house remembered. It remembered everything. It thrived on the energy of fear, growing stronger each night, reaching to the very souls of those who dared enter, the invisible tormentor by the third month in the house. The Lutz family's world had been reduced to the oppressive, ever-present nightmare of 108 Ocean Avenue. What began as strange noises and fleeting shadows had escalated into a constant, suffocating vigilance against an invisible, malevolent force. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of light, every whisper from the shadows was a potential threat, a reminder that the house was alive in a way no home should ever be. George often described it as a presence that watched, waited, and learned. No part of their daily routine escaped its attention. Even when they left the rooms, the sense of being observed remained, a cold, almost tangible weight pressing from walls and corners, moving with them as if the house itself had eyes. The window incident one morning. Kathy was awakened by a loud bang from the front of the house. Rushing to investigate, she found one of the large living room windows shattered from the inside. The shards of glass littered the hardwood floor, yet there was no evidence of anyone entering or exiting. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. George arrived, equally bewildered, and carefully inspected the property. Neighbors, some still wary from the DeFeo murders, reported hearing nothing. The police were called but found no evidence of foul play. Yet, when the family returned home that evening, the broken window was repaired, perfectly, inexplicably. It was as if the house itself had restored what it had destroyed, mocking them in a silent, sinister way. The unrelenting cold spots, which had been intermittent, became nearly constant. Certain rooms would register temperatures below freezing, yet thermometers showed normal readings elsewhere. The children reported feeling icy hands brushing their arms as they slept, and George often awoke with frost on the covers despite the furnace running full blast. It was not mere cold. It was invasive. It penetrated clothing, bedding, and skin, leaving a lingering chill in the soul. Kathy described it as the air of death itself, a tangible sensation that no amount of blankets, heat, or clothing could ward off. The red eyes, perhaps the most terrifying recurring phenomenon, was the appearance of red eyes in the darkness. Daniel, the eldest child, first reported it while peeking around the corner of the hallway late one night. Two glowing red dots hovered at the far end of the corridor, unblinking, unflinching, watching. The eyes followed him from room to room. They appeared at the top of the staircase, at the end of the hall, sometimes through the glass of mirrors. The family tried to rationalize reflections, imagination, shadows. Yet, the consistency and timing of the appearances defied reason. Missy, the youngest, described them simply: they see everything. They know everything. George's journal entries from this period convey a man unraveling under the constant psychic pressure. "I cannot rest," he wrote. "I cannot breathe. The eyes are everywhere, waiting, always waiting." Physical manifestations. Soon, the phenomena escalated from psychological terror to physical attacks. George reported being scratched and bitten while alone in the house, deep, raw wounds with no apparent cause. Kathy experienced similar assaults, Objects flying off shelves, chairs thrown, and beds shaking violently as though the very structure sought to hurl them from their rooms. One evening, the children were woken by a low, guttural growl coming from beneath the floorboards. They described the sound so unnatural, so horrifying, that it made their blood run cold. George and Kathy attempted to locate the source, but all they found were empty, undisturbed floorboards. Even the family dog refused to enter certain rooms, growling and whimpering incessantly at invisible entities. Its instinctive fear only confirmed that what they faced was real, not imagined. The possessive force by this time, it became apparent that the house did not merely haunt, it attempted to possess. George felt moments of anger, aggression, and paranoia that were entirely uncharacteristic. Kathy experienced crushing despair and bouts of uncontrollable crying. As if the house fed on their emotional vulnerability, the children became more withdrawn, whispering to themselves and occasionally speaking in voices that were not their own. At times, Daniel would recount conversations he never had, repeating words he had never heard. Missy would laugh or cry in sudden, unpredictable bursts, insisting that the man in the corner was talking to her. George, in a particularly desperate entry, wrote, "It wants to own us. It wants to twist us. It is not content to scare. It wants to control." The exorcisms begin. Faced with escalating aggression, George and Kathy sought further spiritual assistance. Multiple priests visited, each attempting blessings and rites of exorcism. One priest reported an incident during a blessing where doors slammed with such force that they splintered the wood, and unseen hands seemed to throw religious icons across the room. The priests unanimously described the house as harboring a concentrated evil, one that has fed on death and tragedy, growing stronger with each soul that enters. One priest, speaking privately, told George that the house seemed aware of its own infamy, delighting in the fear it could instill in newcomers, and that it possessed a malevolent intelligence unlike any haunting he had ever witnessed. Voices and threats. By the fourth month, the auditory phenomena became impossible to ignore. Whispers were no longer garbled or distant. They were clear, directed, and often threatening. "Get out or die." They were weak. "You will be weak too. The blood is ours now. Yours soon." Sometimes the voices mimicked the Lutzes themselves, calling their names or repeating their private conversations. In these moments, the family could not distinguish between reality and the house's manipulations. George documented an event that terrified him most: a voice, clear as day, whispering through the walls while he lay awake in bed. "I am in your head." Always. The physical evidence, the disturbances were not limited to perception. The family reported seeing full-body apparitions, fleeting shadows moving across hallways, and objects defying gravity. Mirrors would fog from unknown sources, often spelling out ominous words or phrases, while doors slammed violently on their own. Even items locked in cabinets or drawers would reappear elsewhere in the house. One night, George awoke to find the furniture in the living room stacked in impossible formations. Chairs balanced atop tables at precarious angles. Defying physics, neighbors corroborated some events. Strange lights visible through the windows, the sounds of screaming in the night, and the pervasive smell of decay that seemed to emanate from within the house. The climax of terror. By the fifth month, 108 Ocean Avenue had become a prison of fear. The Lutz family, once hopeful for a new beginning, now lived in a state of perpetual dread. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow held the potential for violence. The malevolent presence had escalated beyond mere haunting. It had become a force that seemed determined to consume them entirely. George often sat in the living room late at night, notebook in hand, trying to document the occurrences. Yet even writing was a struggle. The pen would sometimes refuse to move, the paper freezing under his hand, as if the house itself resisted his attempt to record its actions. He began leaving audio recorders throughout the home, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. The tapes revealed the unthinkable, whispers that spoke directly to the family, doors opening and slamming violently, and objects moving without contact. One night, George awoke to a noise that made his blood run cold, a rhythmic pounding, like footsteps marching in precise, menacing steps. It started in the basement, ascending the stairs, echoing through the hallways. He could hear breathing, slow and deliberate, but saw nothing. Every shadow seemed to twist, every reflection in the mirror warped. The house was alive, and it was hunting them. The children's experiences became increasingly disturbing. Daniel, who had once been a curious, intelligent boy, grew withdrawn and fearful. He reported seeing a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed, glowing red eyes fixed on him. Missy, the youngest, began speaking in strange voices she did not recognize, uttering cryptic warnings about the house and its intentions. Christopher would sometimes laugh maniacally in the middle of the night, claiming that the man in the corner was talking to him. The family tried to comfort one another, but the house seemed to thrive on their fear. Every attempt to rationalize, every attempt to ignore or explain away the phenomena failed. The presence was persistent, intelligent, and relentless. Relentless poltergeist activity. The house's aggression escalated to outright violence. Objects flew across rooms, sometimes striking walls or furniture with a force that left dents and broken glass. Doors slammed with terrifying force, and the windows rattled violently as though the house itself were shaking. One night, a large, antique chair was thrown across the living room. Narrowly missing George, Kathy experienced attacks in her bedroom, blankets pulled violently off the bed, hands feeling as though icy fingers pressed against her skin, and whispers directly in her ear that seemed to come from nowhere. The house was no longer just haunted, it was attacking them psychologically and physically, leaving them exhausted and fearful to the point of panic. The Red Rooms, the mysterious Red Room, became the epicenter of the haunting. George discovered it one afternoon when he returned from an errand. The room was darker than usual, and an unnatural chill permeated the air. Objects inside moved of their own accord, books sliding off shelves, chairs spinning slowly as if guided by invisible hands. Kathy, too, experienced strange visions in the room. She would see figures appearing in the corners, only to vanish when she approached. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick and suffocating. The family began to fear the room, avoiding it whenever possible. But the house had a way of forcing them back into its grasp. Religious intervention, in a desperate bid for relief. The Lutz family invited several priests to perform blessings. Each attempt yielded limited results. While some of the activity temporarily ceased during the rituals, the house would resume its attacks with even greater intensity afterward. Doors would slam violently, objects would move with destructive force, and the whispers would return louder than ever. One priest, recounting his experience, described hearing voices inside the walls, speaking in a language he could not understand, yet threatening in their tone. He later admitted to feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the house itself were watching, calculating, and anticipating every move the family made. George's desperation. George's journal entries from this period reveal a man pushed to the edge of sanity. I do not know how much longer we can endure this. The house does not sleep, it does not rest, it waits for us to falter. Every shadow is a threat. Every sound is a warning. I am losing control of my mind. I fear what it wants from us. I fear what will happen if we cannot escape. George attempted to take practical measures, locking doors, checking windows, and attempting to secure the house, but the entity was unconcerned with physical boundaries. It existed beyond conventional understanding, capable of manipulating the physical world in ways that defied reason. A night of terror. The climax came one night when the house erupted in relentless activity. Doors slammed with deafening force. Furniture flew across rooms, and the children screamed in terror. George and Kathy were both physically assaulted by invisible forces, leaving bruises and scratches. The temperature dropped drastically, and the stench of decay filled the air. Amid the chaos, the red eyes appeared again, glowing menacingly in the hallway. Whispers filled the rooms, repeating threats, mocking the family, and speaking in voices that mimicked their own. The entity seemed to revel in their fear, feeding off the panic and despair that permeated every corner of the house. The family realized that the house was not just haunted, it was alive, malevolent, and intent on breaking them. Every attempt to flee or resist was met with increased aggression, as if the house itself had a will and intelligence beyond human comprehension. Decision to escape by the end of the night. George and Kathy understood that survival required leaving the house permanently. They could not fight it, reason with it, or pray it away. The entity had established dominance, and the only option was escape. They packed their belongings hurriedly, their movements frantic and fearful, knowing that every second spent inside the house increased the danger. The children clung to them, exhausted and terrified, unable to comprehend fully the evil that had pursued them. As they drove away from 108 Ocean Avenue, the house loomed behind them, silent for a moment. Then, as if acknowledging their departure, the windows seemed to glint like eyes in the dark. The presence lingered in their minds, leaving them aware that while they had escaped physically, the memory and the terror would follow them forever. The escape and aftermath. The Lutz family's escape from 108 Ocean Avenue was frantic and desperate. In the early hours of a cold December morning, George and Kathy loaded their children into the car. Every nerve in their bodies screamed to leave, yet a creeping awareness clung to them, a sense that the house was aware of their flight, observing, and perhaps even angry. As they drove away, the house stood silent, its windows dark, yet somehow watching. The surrounding neighborhood remained eerily quiet, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded inside. Yet the Lutzes could feel the presence in their minds, an invisible weight pressing against their thoughts, leaving them unsettled long after the streetlights faded behind them. Psychological scars. Even after fleeing, the psychological impact of their time in the house persisted. The family struggled with anxiety, insomnia, and a constant sense of being followed. Objects would occasionally move in their new residence, not with the same intensity as 108 Ocean Avenue, but enough to remind them that something had embedded itself into their lives. George, in interviews and writings after the experience, described the lingering effects. "I can feel it sometimes, like a shadow stretching into my mind. It's not here physically, but it is present, waiting. We were lucky to escape with our lives, but the house, it doesn't let go." Kathy recalled vivid nightmares for months afterward. In her dreams, the house loomed larger than life, its windows glowing red, the whispers echoing endlessly. Even waking hours were tainted by fear. A creaking floorboard, a sudden chill, or a flickering light could send her heart racing, triggering memories of the terror they endured. Media attention and public fascination. The story of the Lutz family quickly captured national attention. Articles, interviews, and documentaries chronicled the horrifying events. The combination of the previous DeFeo murders and the Lutz's haunting experiences created a narrative that blurred the line between crime and the supernatural. The family's accounts were detailed and consistent, lending credibility to their claims. They described, with precise timing and consistency, the cold spots, moving objects, whispers, and apparitions. Even skeptics had difficulty dismissing the sheer volume of reported phenomena. The house, already infamous for the DeFeo murders, became a symbol of terror, its reputation cemented in American culture as the archetype of the haunted home. Skepticism and debate. Despite widespread media attention, skeptics questioned the veracity of the Lutz's story. Some suggested that the haunting was exaggerated or fabricated for profit. Others pointed to psychological factors, stress, suggestion, or even shared delusions as possible explanations. Yet multiple investigators and priests corroborated aspects of the haunting. Physical evidence, such as photographs capturing unexplained shadows, inexplicable cold spots, and recordings of disembodied voices, convinced many that something beyond natural explanation had occurred. Regardless of belief, the events at 108 Ocean Avenue left an indelible mark on paranormal studies, creating one of the most discussed and documented hauntings in history. The house's continuing legacy over the decades. 108 Ocean Avenue has changed owners multiple times, but the legend endures. Visitors and paranormal investigators report strange phenomena, flickering lights, cold spots, whispers, and a persistent feeling of being watched. The house itself has become almost mythic, a case study in both horror and human fascination with the unknown. Documentaries, films, and books, including the Amityville Horror, written by Jay Anson, chronicled these events, combining the documented facts of the DeFeo murders with the Lutz's alleged supernatural experiences. While debates about authenticity continue, the impact on popular culture is undeniable. The house is more than wood, brick, and glass. It has become a symbol of fear, of the unknown, and of the thin veil that separates ordinary life from the unimaginable. For those who dare to enter, the warnings are clear. 108 Ocean Avenue is no ordinary home. It remembers, it watches, it waits. Lessons from Horror, the story of the Amityville Haunting, illustrates the complex interplay between tragedy, belief, and fear. 6 lives were brutally taken, leaving a tangible legacy of sorrow. The Lutz's experiences suggest that trauma can linger in ways that defy logic, manifesting as psychological and perhaps even supernatural phenomena. It also demonstrates the human need to understand, document, and confront fear. George and Kathy recorded, observed, and sought help, but some forces cannot be tamed by human reason alone. The house, with its deep-rooted history of death and violence, acted as both a mirror and amplifier of human vulnerability, unanswered questions. Even decades later, many questions remain unanswered. Was the haunting truly supernatural? Or was it a psychological projection triggered by the knowledge of the DeFeo murders? Could the house itself, constructed and lived in over decades, somehow retain the echoes of violence? The Lutz's story does not provide definitive answers. What it does offer is a testament to the profound impact of fear and the enduring mystery of places touched by tragedy. One chilling detail remains. While the Lutzes escaped, they reported that the house seemed to know they had left. Windows would occasionally appear as glowing eyes in dreams. Shadows would stretch unnaturally in photographs taken nearby. Even in absence, 108 Ocean Avenue maintained its sinister presence, a warning to anyone who dared to cross its threshold. The final word, 108. Ocean Avenue remains a haunting symbol in the annals of American history. Its tale is a complex fusion of real-world horror, human psychology, and alleged supernatural activity. For the Lutz family, the house was an unbearable prison. For the public, it became a story that continues to fascinate, terrify, and provoke debate. The Amityville Haunting is more than legend. It is a documented narrative of fear, survival, and the inexplicable. The house stands, silent and brooding, a testament to the darkness that can linger long after tragedy strikes, a darkness that waits patiently, watching for the next family to dare to enter. For those who hear the story today, the lesson is clear. Some places hold memories darker than death, and some houses are alive with evil.